In 1955, Don Richardson, along with his future bride Carol, sat in a large auditorium at Prairie Bible College in Alberta, Canada, to hear speaker Ebenezer Vine from the Regions Beyond Missionary Union. Ebenezer was there to sound the call for Christian pioneers to plant the banner of the gospel in Dutch New Guinea. Don and Carol knew God had intended this call for them. After tying the knot in 1960 and the birth of their first son in 1961, this young family set off for the coast of New Guinea in 1962. The region where the Richardsons landed was on the western half of the large island of New Guinea, just north of Australia. The eastern half of the island is the independent country Papua New Guinea, and the western half is a province of Indonesia, which took over the region from the Dutch in the early 1960s. Other missionaries from the RBMU had established a missionary base camp in the region and had begun to learn languages and plant churches. The Sawi were a semi-nomadic people group who lived in a low-lying coastal region which Don described as hot, humid, and as unhealthy as it can possibly be. The Sawi villages were not accessible by roads, only waterways. Don and a few fellow missionaries set sail to explore and scout the Sawi villages. By God's grace, they were able to make contact with a few warriors from the tribe. One important contact was a warrior named Connie, who providentially spoke both Sawi and the language of the Kayagar tribe, which another missionary on this initial journey had been teaching to Don. With Connie's help, Don began to learn the local language of the Sawi people. He was also able to recruit a small group of Sawi men to help him build a residence for his family in the region. Once their home was complete, Don and Carol and their young son Stephen set sail in a dugout canoe to begin their new life with the Sawi people. Once the tribe felt safe that these Tuans, or foreigners, were there in peace, the people danced and celebrated with drums for hours into their first night in their new home. Carol, who was trained as a nurse, was able to serve the people by providing medical care for common diseases such as malaria. Don continued to grow in his relationships with the people. He shared the gospel, but was discouraged how poorly it was received. In fact, the Sawi people seemed to relate most to Judas in the gospel. This is because of a tradition of glorifying betrayal, or in their words, tuia sonai man, roughly translated as fattening the enemy or the pig for the slaughter. As one could imagine, generations of this ideal left them constantly in a state of hostility with neighboring tribes. This left Don and his family literally in the crossfire of enemy arrows. With the Sawi hardness to the gospel message, Don and Carol began to worry their efforts may prove in vain. After a prayerful consideration, they would give the Sawi leaders an ultimatum: make peace with your enemies, or we will leave and find a tribe that is safer for our family. The locals begged Tuan Don not to leave them. They promised by tomorrow morning they would sprinkle cold water on the hostility, meaning they would bring about peace demanded by the Tuans. Don and Carol barely slept that night. They awoke to the sound of a great commotion. Fathers and mothers were fighting over their children. One man, the father of only one child, wrapped his 6-month-old son in his arms and emerged from his home in the trees. His wife trailed behind him screaming, "Not us, we only have one child." But this man, named Kayo, marched sorrowfully onward to the village of the Hainam people, one of their greatest enemies. Kayo chose another man out of the crowd from the people that gathered. The two men made an oath to one another and exchanged sons. With this exchange, the men vowed that they would give these sons their own names, and they would plead for peace between their tribes from that moment on. In bewilderment, Don asked what was happening. He was told that this was an ancient custom of the people to ensure peace among the tribes. For warring tribes wanting to make peace, a son would be given in exchange for the son of their enemy. As long as that son remained among the enemy tribe, there would be peace. They were known as the peace child. While Carol and Don felt relieved for the earthly peace this would bring among the tribes, they felt overjoyed and overwhelmed with God's goodness and the provision of this beautiful picture of the gospel. God had carefully embedded this tradition within this people group for just this time. As Don would call it, this redemptive analogy provided the inroad to the gospel that Karen and Don had prayed for. Jesus was the ultimate peace child. He was the Father's only Son, given to his enemies to bring peace. In exchange, we who place our faith in this peace child are adopted as sons and daughters. With this redemptive analogy, God moved in mighty ways from that moment forward among the Sawi people. Today, the Sawi people are thriving. Nearly 60% of the Sawi population are now born-again Christians, and an area once gripped by darkness is now home to believers from many tribes and many tongues.